Now, did you understand me say 50 or 15?
50.
Okay.
Okay. Let me go ahead and we can get started right now. Well, welcome, Dr. Bill Warner. We're going to have a nice discussion. Let me just introduce myself real quick. And if you like, you take some time to introduce yourself. So I am the lead here on the Dawah team inside Sarasota, Florida. And we make a lot of presentations on Islam. And one of the topics I like to discuss is why Islam is a religion of peace, love, and tolerance. You want to take a few minutes, you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, my name is Bill Warner. I'm a writer on the subject of Islam. And I think that's probably all we need to say now.
Okay, well, you sent a very interesting email about some of the questions you would have regarding the claim why Islam is a religion of peace. You brought up many issues like slavery, captives of war, ISIS, Sharia law. These are all great points. I want you to feel free to talk about them, but not all at once. Since we only got 15 minutes, do you think maybe a good time we could start is the things about battles that, if you look at the Quran, there are calls for warfare, and there are many battles which have taken place. So why then are we claiming Islam is a religion of peace? Maybe do you think that's a good place to start?
Well, I agree with you that Islam is a religion of peace. It's just that when we read further in Muhammad's life, we also discover it's the politics of jihad.
Mm-hmm. Right, and so it looks like it's a religion of warfare. Well, here's a question I would perhaps ask you. Well, let me first raise this point. Just because you see warfare, that doesn't automatically negate the claim for peace. Even a pacifist will accept that there are legitimate reasons for war. You might, for example, to stop persecution, or for a just war. There is a just war doctrine, so it would not necessarily contradict that. So I think throughout the discussion, I want people to really focus on what are the reasons given in the Quran for why there was war, and see if they're legitimate, if they are really right reasons. So without further ado, maybe I can ask you this question, sir. Do you see anywhere in the Quran where it teaches fight them to slay them because they're non-believers, or fight them because to spread Islam all over the world? This is the reasons why you have to wage war, or fight them to, I don't know, I'm just thinking of some nefarious reasons, like fight them because whoever doesn't believe in Islam must be fought and defeated, and that's the reason why you should fight them. Do you see anywhere in the Quran about that? Something like that?
What I do is I pay more attention to Muhammad than I do the Quran.
Mm-hmm.
And all we see is that time and again, he attacked people who had not attacked him.
Mm-hmm.
So I find it easier to understand the Sirah and the Hadith than I do the Quran. And so since they complement each other, let's just stay with that. And
Sure.
While we're at it, let's take a look at what happened after Muhammad died. What did the rightly guided caliphs do? They went to war against the Kafir.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let me quickly respond to this. So what I'm seeing here is that there's sort of there's the problem is what you're saying is you're sort of conceding to the fact of what the Muslims have been saying all along, that if you look in the Quran, and I have a copy of the Quran right over here, it is a book of peace. But now you're saying, I'm not sure if I can answer your question from the Quran, because there are many reasons for warfare which are given in the Quran. The Quran said, well, here's a reason why you should fight. But you're saying I can't really challenge that book. This is a book of peace, but I think I can make my case from the Hadith and the Tariq, the history afterwards. Am I understanding you correctly?
I find them to say the same thing. Actually, it's just that it's so easy to understand the Sirah because it's a biography, and it's so easy to understand the Hadith because they're little snippets, that it's just easier to deal with that.
Oh,
but the two complement each other. Let's be serious.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe I can ask you, from the Quran, can you find any kind of nefarious reason, like fight them because they are, kill all the unbelievers to the last because they rejected Muhammad? Do you find any teaching like that in the Quran?
Well, of course, the one that's most frequently quoted is Surah 9:29.
Mm-hmm. Sure, let's post that. As a matter of fact, I actually I'm going to share my desktop if that's okay, and let's go there just so everybody can see, can kind of read along. Surah 9 verse 29. So the verse basically says, "Fight those who believe not in Allah in the last day, nor in those." Well, let me just get it up for you. Is my screen coming up clear for you?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So it says, fight those who believe not in Allah or in the last day, and who do not consider unlawful what Allah and his messenger have made unlawful, and who do not adopt the religion of truth from those who were given the scriptures. Fight until they give the jizya with willingness until they are subdued. So, right. So here is a call to go out and fight, as I have alluded to, and you are right. There are passages which do teach to go out and fight, but the question is why? Like when I read that, I'm like, okay, God, why? Why should I do this? The Quran gives very good reasons for that. Do you know anywhere in the Quran where we could find you should fight them because they're non-believers? Or a person can read this and say, well, because they don't accept the religion of truth. That's why you should fight them, because they don't accept the religion of truth. Do you see anywhere in the Quran where it states that?
Again, I come back to the fact that the Quran to me is a dualistic document. Let's start with that.
Mm-hmm.
That is, the early Quran written in Mecca has no jihad in it whatsoever. When I studied the jihad written in Medina, 24% of it is devoted to jihad. Mm-hmm. This is a significant portion. Now, why they're doing it doesn't. If I'm mugged on the street, does it really make any difference to me what the motive of the mugger was? No, the fact is I'm mugged. And the fact is, if people are dying, whatever reason you give for it, the fact is people are dying.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think to compare the warfare which we see here to a mugger may be a false analogy, and I think that's a very superficial reading of the Quran. I mean, without further ado, let's just go to the Quran and let's see why they're asking us to fight. Because I'm curious here, because when I read a verse like that, it's disturbing. I'm asking God, why do you want me to fight? So let's go to chapter 4, verse 75 over here, and this is just one of the many verses of the Quran which gives the reason for not just defensive warfare, but offensive warfare as well. Let me just go Control F75. Oh boy, that didn't work. Okay, let's try this again. I got a page down over here. And actually, the Quran gives many different reasons for fighting. It's not just here, but we'll look at, here we go. And now it's criticizing you, Dr. Bill Warner. The Quran is criticizing you. It's saying, and what is the matter with you that you fight not in the cause of Allah? Yeah, what's the matter with you? For those who are oppressed among men, women, and children who say, our Lord, take us out of the city of oppressive people and appoint for us from yourself a protector.
Oppression.
Hey, sir?
What is oppression? And I'm really not interested in sitting here going through verse after verse you pick out in the Quran, because what you're doing is as cherry picking. Again, I come back to the fact that I agree with you that Islam is a religion of peace. It's just that it also invokes the politics of jihad. And I gave you the example of the 4 rightly guided caliphs to illustrate this.
Sure.
I think it mattered much to the people in Syria which verse the Abu Bakr was using as he invaded their country.
Mm-hmm.
You think the Byzantines really cared when Muhammad sent his warriors out to fight them in Syria, what his reason was? No, the fact is Muhammad's troops left Arabia and went into Syria to attack the Syrian Christians.
Yes.
As was done by Umar, Abu Bakr, Uthman, and we're missing one, Ali as well. So whether or not you want to rattle some verses around and say, well, this is the reason they were doing it or not, didn't really make any difference to the Syrians, because here they come over and it's war.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, you're bringing up some good points, because so I guess when a question like that is addressed to us, the 4 rightly guided caliphs, they waged war. They conquered many lands. Syria was just one of them, as you pointed out. But the question which I always like to go back to is what motivated them was really the teachings of the Quran. And I think since you and I can agree that the teachings of Muhammad, at least the Quran, which we have right here, you and I can agree, this is a book of peace and is a very peaceful book. But now let's go to the Hadith and the Sirah.
But it also contains war.
Well, yeah, as I pointed out, there are legitimate reasons for war. And when you look at the reasons, like we're looking right over here, that's pretty, even a pacifist can look at that and say, well, okay, that's a good reason. There is also, so if we can just put aside the Quran now, the Quran is done, we can put that aside, and we we agree on that. So did you want to start from the Sirah now about the Hadith and the life of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Maybe that is more warlike.
Well, indeed, if I do it, let's take the Sirah. You've
Yes.
agreed that you read Ishaq, right?
Ibn Ishaq, is it? Yes, correct, correct.
Okay, when we do that, we discover that the bulk of the material that's contained within Ishaq is Muhammad involved in jihad. I
Yes.
forget now what proportion of the Sirah is the text of the Sirah is devoted to jihad, but it's way over half.
Mm-hmm.
So I say the man was enjoying being in jihad.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that's just what the Sirah teaches.
Okay. One question I have for you.
As a matter of fact, the Sirah devotes very little of its attention to the preaching in Mecca of the religion of peace. It devotes most of its material to the war that was launched out of Medina under Muhammad.
Well, I can't agree or disagree with you because I just never looked at it from that perspective. But let's go there. So you're right. There are battles being taken place, and there's more warlike inside Sirah ibn Ishaq. My question to you: there are many people who were fought. Do you see anybody in Sirah ibn Ishaq in which they were just a peaceful nation of people minding their own business, and all of a sudden you have the army of Muhammad right there on their doorstep, and they're ready to attack them, and they didn't do anything wrong? Do you know of any people like that?
The one that comes to comes to mind is Muta, Tabuk, and Khaybar.
Okay, so those, if you look at Tabuk, which was actually, I forgot to mention, Surah 9, verse 29, that the background of Surah 9:29 was the expedition to Tabuk. So this was based on information, this is all in Sirah ibn Ishaq, that the Romans were gathering an army to attack. So they went to Tabuk on the orders of Surah 9, verse 29. They found out nobody was there was no army, and they turned back.
What about Khaybar?
Khaybar, I don't believe there was any innocent people who were attacked at the Battle of Khaybar.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the Jews of Khaybar?
Oh yeah, we could. Yeah, in fact, Ibn Ishaq goes in detail about that, and what they talked about in both the Jewish tribes. There were not just Khaybar, there were Banu Nadir and others. They showed that they were guilty of breaching the trust, breaching what is known as the contract of Medina, the Dasturul Medina. And in this contract, Muhammad extended an olive branch where the Jewish community and the Muslim community live in peace. But then the people, there were certain Jewish tribes which then violated that peace contract, conspired with the enemy to open the back door for an attack. So if you read Sirah ibn Ishaq, and by the way, this is all in 100% agreement with all the fuqaha, all the scholars. Everyone agrees on this, that the Khaybar, and especially the ones that you mentioned, Muhammad was not the instigator. I don't even know of a single historian who would argue otherwise.
Well, I argue that just the opposite of you. When you send your troops out of your country into another country, I do not call that a defensive motion.
Well, let's Google it, Battle of Khaybar, okay, and we can maybe get a little bit more.
The only people I pay attention to are we've already been over that Hadith, Sirah, and Quran. Mm-hmm. I don't recognize Imam Google.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. What'd you say?
I don't recognize Imam Google.
Oh, you don't follow Google?
Well, what I'm saying is, we have everything written out in the Sirah. Why do we need to go somewhere else?
Okay, and maybe we can, maybe we can agree to disagree on this, because I don't see any evidence that the people of Khaybar were just innocent people and they truly were minding their own business. If you can show me a reference from Sirah ibn Ishaq, that's also online too, I would be happy to look at it. But at least, in fact, let's go to Sirah ibn Ishaq, because here it specifically addresses and talks about this matter. So I've actually, what's really cool was that Sirah ibn Ishaq is actually online, and you can literally download the whole thing. Some guy made a scan of it and put it online for us. So Muhammad made it very clear about the warfares which he engaged in. Let's see if it'll come up here, my screenshot, if it will. Give me 1 second here. So here we go. I think this is it. Can you see that?
The arrest of the affair of Khaybar.
Oh, okay, good. You can look at that. I was just making sure the thing was coming up clear. And let's see, what reference is this here? This is, okay, never mind. These are about what you're talking about.
What are you trying to prove from doing this?
Oh, well, I made references from the books, which I can use as a reference from Sirah ibn Ishaq, which I actually cannot find right now. I think let me go down a little bit more. And so let's see if I can find it here. So basically, let's see. Just give me 1 second here while I find that reference. But okay, so do you, as far as any teaching to go out and attack people, do you find anything like that inside the?
Let's take an example which you've mentioned. You've mentioned the treaty, or what are you going to call it, that Muhammad signed when he came to Medina the first time. What did you call it?
The Charter of Medina. Yes.
The Charter of Medina. Okay. I noticed something very peculiar about it, that although the Jewish tribes, there were 3 of them signed off on the deal, 3 years later, Medina was free of Jews. So whatever reason that we want to look at this happen, we have to agree the fact that Muhammad made Medina cleansed of Jews not many years after the signing of this document.
I don't know if Medina was cleansed of Jews, because if you looked inside the Charter of Medina, there were many tribes. There was a Banu Jah. There were other different Jewish tribes in there.
3 Jewish tribes.
Well, I got the Charter of Medina if you want to look at it. Let me just hit the stop screen share while I can find out. And we can look, and you'll see there are many Jewish tribes which were listed at the bottom. Can we
agree that in the end they were all disappeared? By the time Muhammad died, there were no Jews left in Medina. Can we agree on that?
Well, what we can agree is not only did the Jews and the Christians leave, but the Muslims left as well. That is because there is no future in the Arabian Peninsula for either groups. And that's why if you go to Saudi Arabia today, what you're going to find is that the graves of the companion are about 10. All the graves of the Sahaba, of the companions, are in Tashkent, in Syria. And everybody left the Arabian Peninsula because the future and prosperity is outside of the peninsula. And we know that to be true because what would have been their future? What would have been the future of anybody remaining there until 1938? Just dates, the economy revolved around dates and the Hajj. That was it. And they lived in tents for the next 1,400 years until the big oil boom in 1938. So that was actually in the best interest of everybody. And that's why you don't even find the graves of the Sahaba except 10 in there.
So the reason that the Islam exploded militarily out of the peninsula was they had too many dates and too many tents.
So now
you're the neighbor of these people and they come at you with a sword. Again, what motivates them is not as important as the fact that in the end, your country has now been conquered by Islam.
Mm-hmm. So when we go to this hadith and the Sirah literature, we don't, in fact, you know what?
Yes, I never noticed how much of the hadith is written, taking Bukhari, and you and I agree on that. The Bukhari is the sort of the gold standard of hadith.
Correct.
Right? Mm-hmm. I dropped the point out of my head. Move along. I forgot what I was going to say.
Let me share my desktop again because I just found my reference from Sirah ibn Ishaq about the warfares. Okay, so let me go ahead and show you this. Okay, so now this is this is all online, and this is from Sirah ibn Ishaq, the life of Muhammad. So it's talking about a battle, the Battle of Taqif, okay? And here, look what they say over here. If it says over here, if you offer, where my marker is about the 5th line down, right. 5th line up. If you offer peace, we will fight you and kill you. No, it says we will.
What are the terms of peace?
There are no terms of peace in here.
Well, what I'm saying is that merely saying that something is peaceful does not mean that it's, shall we say, friendly, because you can also have that where you, again, let me make this point another way. When I look at Bukhari, this is what the point I was really going to make. When I look at Bukhari, I count through over 1/5 of it is devoted to jihad. And yet you're proclaiming, and this jihad is being described as people dying, attacks, beheadings, and yet all of this is being described as peaceful. So you jump through a lot of hoops to come up with peace when people are dying all around you. And by the way, this death does not only include large battles, it also includes assassinations. Muhammad had people assassinated whom he didn't like the poem they wrote, he didn't like the remarks they made. And so this jihad goes from individuals to countries.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's read this real carefully, then I'll address your point. Here's what they say: if you offer us peace, we will accept it and make you partners in peace and war. If you refuse, we will fight you doggedly. Twill, and then it goes on about the brutality of war. But what's interesting about the next passage, he goes on about the brutality of war. Why? He's trying to scare you into taking this offer. Hey, listen, let's make peace. And so if I read that, I'll be like, you know what, that's a good deal. Now I want to address your other question. What are the conditions of peace? So there, again, this is going to Bukhari, which you were mentioning here. It says over in Bukhari, if I can pull that reference up here real quick, just give me 1 second. It said there were two people who the Prophet Muhammad were basically involved with here. And let's see if I can bring it over here. Pull it up over here. And for those who would like to know my references, you can email me, and I can send that to you. So because I know like scrolling through here might be a little bit different, might be a little bit difficult. I tell you what, I'll find that in just a second here. But let me go back. Let me stop the screen share here, and while I find that, and I'll try to answer your point. You are right. There are battles inside the Hadith literature. But what we find about those battles is, number one, we see the reasons given by the Quran. It was to end oppression. And I think that's a pretty good reason to do so. And we never find anything in the Quran which says, fight them because they are non-believers, because they are, they don't believe in Islam. This is not in Quran. This is not in Hadith. This is not in Sirah. Whenever we find a reason to fight, it's always a noble, legitimate reason. And I finally found the condition of foreign.
Isn't it odd how many reasons he found to fight once he got to Medina? I counted 95 battles of 95 acts of jihad in Medina. Mm-hmm. Which people die. Now these people, I guess, deserve to die, is what your argument is, but I just know that once the people were around Muhammad, a lot of them died.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, they don't deserve to die. What I'm saying is, when we look, I'm saying three things. Number one, the reasons for warfare as given in Islam are actually pretty legitimate. Number two, I've never found any innocent group of people, or you could say people who have living peacefully by themselves, and they just got attacked and were killed and something by Muhammad. We don't find any example of that. Now here, this is taken from, the reference here is from, I think it's Sahih Bukhari. Let me scroll down here. Yeah, it's Bukhari. It says here, the pagans were of two kinds in regards to the relationship to the Prophet and the believers. Some of them were those with whom the Prophet was at war and used to fight against, and they used to fight him. The others were those whom the Prophet made a treaty, and neither did the Prophet fight them, nor did they fight him. Now, this is interesting because if you look at the propaganda campaign against Islam, they said that there is no peaceful coexistence with non-Muslims. They are here to dominate and destroy and kill. And just from the opening couple of 20 minutes of this discussion, our scriptures do not support that canard.
Isn't it odd that your scriptures don't support it and yet it continues to happen?
Well, what's happening today is very different, okay? In fact, if we look at the terrorism of today, let's take September 11th. This is an example. You had 19 hijackers, but not a single verse of the Quran. Where do they say, hey, the Quran, I got the Quran over here. The Quran said, let's see, slay the unbelievers until the last, and so, you know what? I think I'm going to get on an airplane and do these things. Wrong. We can Google, interview with Osama bin Laden, and the first interview will come up as a PBS interview. We see that it's more complicated than that. In fact, none of these, you got 19 hijackers, I don't know how many are in jail in Guantanamo Bay, not a single verse of the Quran where it said, we had to go out and do this. They all stated stuff like, well, because of what's happening in Palestine, and because of the Iraq war, and because of this, so we had to fight back somehow. They gave these as their explanations. So I wouldn't trace the war and the terrorism of today back to the Quran. Yes.
So 1,400 years of death. I gave a rough counting as to the people who died in jihad, and these are rough figures. 60 million Christians, 80 million Hindus, 10 million Buddhists, and 120 million Africans. Somehow or other, all these people died, and all for good, peaceful reasons. And I guess the Muslims who killed and enslaved them were oppressing them. I don't know. All I know is, for whatever reasons you give, the deaths continue throughout history. You keep saying it wasn't the Islam that did it, but the people who were killed thought it was.
Well, what I'm saying is, if we go to the scriptures, the Quran, we agree is religion of the book is peaceful. We see that the Hadith, it gives many good reasons for warfare. We see that is there is war in there, but there are legitimate reasons for it. So the Quran and Hadith are innocent. Okay, so now why do we see let me address your question, which I haven't been addressing, but I'm going to address it now. Okay, so the Quran and Hadith, we can't blame that, because we look through there very quickly. We don't find any problems with it. Now let's talk with the Khulafa, those four rightly guided caliphs. And not only that, but I was seeing your your demonstration, or your little diagram of all the jihad attacks which took place, and there are many of them, hundreds of battles which poured out of the Islamic world. And so let me address that as well, because I think you raised that up. Well, you see, people's understanding of jihad and the reasons of warfare, they evolve. Okay, so we really can't, if someone wages war 200 years after Prophet Muhammad, his understanding of jihad could evolve based on the situation of the day. And let me tell you something. The jihad against Europe that you pointed out inside on your diagram, I actually support that. And I'm going to tell you why. So let me go ahead and share in fact, before I go there, you mentioned that all these tens of millions of people were being killed in jihad. Well, I see that as being a fictitious figure, something which is made up by the Islamophobes, because you could go to, the, how shall I say, the any kind of history department, and that's really where I take my knowledge on history from, and ask them, is this stuff really true? And they will see this as bonkers. So this is an alt version of history which people use to engage in fear mongering. I don't think there's any facts behind it, but what I want you to understand is that history should come from the history department of universities, not propagandists or Fox News propaganda. So now I'm going to give you the justification. I think I've talked to, if you want to say something.
By the way, where I started getting that list of battles that had been fought was from a book published in 2001 at Harvard University by a man in the history department.
Okay.
It was called The Rise of the European Economy. So I also get history from history.
Let me show you the justification for all. You had a diagram of all the little wars and battles which which were fought by the Muslims. I'm going to explain to you why I support that, and it does not contradict that Islam is a religion of peace. This is what Christians did, not just here inside the Congo, but this is what Christians did all across the New World. And I'm not going to read the reference. I'm going to let you read it. I don't want to soil my tongue. It says, evangelize I'm not going to say the word, N-word, so that they stay forever in submission to the white colonists, so they never revolt against the restraints they are undergoing. Recite every day. Happy are those who are weeping, because the kingdom of God is for them. So when I read that, the first thing that I think, I'm a fundamentalist, Salafi Muslim believer. I think, where are the Muslims? Why don't we call a jihad to rescue those people? Because God said inside chapter 4, verse 75, what is wrong with you that you fight not in the way of Allah? For those who are oppressed and they're crying out. So again, another reference. Now, this is very interesting. It says, yeah.
Now, by the way, I condemn this language and I condemn the acts that they're talking about. So there's no reason to discuss this further.
Okay.
But why is it that these Christians are bad when they're involved in the slave business, but when Muslims are involved in the slave business, hey, there's some good, peaceful reason as to why they were being imprisoned and sold as slaves.
So here's my answer to that. My answer to whether they're Muslims or Christians who did slavery, the answer is the same. Chapter 4, verse 75. They should be fought and defeated, because that's a great evil. So the reason why I support the warfare against Europe, well, quite frankly, at that time, Europe was evil. They needed to be, how shall I say,
Well, of
restrained
course,
from the
so the
horrific
Spaniards,
evil they implemented.
so the Christian Spaniards in Spain deserved to be invaded in the year 711 by Tariq. They
Yes,
deserved
I
that.
support that. We saw the horrific atrocities that the Europeans have, not just here in the Congo, but all throughout the New World,
This
in
is
the
the year
Caribbean.
700.
I'm sorry, what's that?
This is in the year 711.
Correct, correct.
So I don't know why you're invoking current politics in that. The fact is that the people in Spain were doing nothing to bother the Muslims in North Africa, and yet they invaded them anyway.
They were a clear and present danger that, if not
By
confronted,
the way,
would.
I can't help but notice something. Although you keep proclaiming peace, you have an excuse for killing every situation you're involved in and want to do so. So yes, you have a peculiar kind of peace, but it's out of on a hair trigger, which can be triggered by anything else, so that all of a sudden peaceful people are dying.
Yes, because the people who just believe in peace and don't interfere, and there's no, quote, offensive warfare, those people, quite frankly, aren't around anymore. That doesn't work. You just cannot sit by yourself in your own little country, see this horrific evil, which we saw in Europe, havoc across the New World, and just say, you know what? Those guys, I'm glad I'm not one of them, because that evil is going to come to your doorstep right
So you would
after they
agree
get done
the
with them.
Spaniards, when they fought the Muslims in Spain for, was it 700 years, because they were being oppressed by the Muslims. So therefore, the doctrine of just war of Islam would justify the Christians driving the Muslims out of Spain, would it not?
Well, if the Muslims were the oppressors, then the same holds true. Then I would support the Spaniards or whoever to drive any group of oppressors, whether they're Muslims or Christians or Jews, out of. Yes, I do support that.
Okay, just curious. But you must admit, for a man who preaches peace all the time, you come up with an excuse, a good excuse for war every time you need it.
Well, again, we have to look at those reasons. This right here, no, I'm sorry, I have zero tolerance for this.
I don't either.
So,
And
yeah,
by the way, I need to point this out. This man calls himself essentially a Christian. It was the Christians who ended the slave trade in Europe, and I'm sorry, in Africa. It was not the Muslims.
Okay, well, and now what's very interesting is they use the Bible to justify this. It says, and make sure that the N-word never become rich. Sing every day that it's impossible for the rich to enter heaven, which, by the way, is Matthew 19:24. And that they use the Bible to justify this wicked evil. And it's just not an isolated incident, right?
I condemn it.
Okay. By the way, are you a Christian?
People were the ones who ended slavery in Africa.
But are you a Christian atheist, or what is your faith? Just wondering.
I have no religion.
No religion? Okay. Well, see, I understand that. And even today, I mean, first of all, I want to compliment the Christian world, the Judeo-Christian world, actually. They've done amazing things to end slavery and for civil rights, and it's unprecedented. We've never seen anything like that, I think, in world history. And it's underappreciated, so I totally agree with you. But there is a history there. There is a problem with the teachings of the Bible, which did justify, and this is just one passage. I'm not blaming this, but there's other passages which justified it.
I've just finished reading an interesting book on slavery in Africa by John Azuma, who's an African.
Mm-hmm.
And what he just goes into great detail is how the slaves who were in prison in Africa were always, that he's aware of, at least in this book, are written under the cover of jihad, that it was jihad that caused them to be subjugated and enslaved. So this idea that only Christians were involved in the slave business, I'm afraid there's blood on the Muslim hands as well.
Correct. There were Muslims who did engage in slavery, but I think the problem which
Muhammad himself engaged in slavery.
Yeah. So now let's talk
about peaceful slavery.
Well, so again, I have a copy here of the Quran. The Quran actually talks a lot about slavery here, and there is endorsement. Well, I would say there's an acceptance for it. But can you show me one thing in the Quran or the Hadith or the Sunnah or anything like that which is negative in the sense? Let me get to the point. My point here is this: the version of the slavery in the Quran and the Hadith is a complete different version of slavery, not what you're seeing practiced, what I just showed you, which European Christians practice.
Are we going to come to the good Muslim slave position?
Yeah, it was so good that please let me be the first slave. So Prophet Muhammad, like for example, and I will maybe show you some hadith on that. I didn't actually bring it with me. Like some of the hadith on that. The number one thing which Muhammad condemned was to beat a slave. Nobody can beat or abuse a slave. Any kind of.
Muhammad said and prayed while slaves were being beaten.
Well, I've never. No. Well, okay. Let's go there.
Let's go. Let's go in the room with Umar, and let's go in the room with Muhammad. And Umar is talking to about this was the event of Aisha being on her necklace being left behind.
Oh, go ahead, please.
And Umar strikes the Baria, the slave, and Muhammad is there. Muhammad had black slaves, white slaves, he had Arab slaves. So Muhammad was a slaver himself.
Well, okay, so let's go very quickly to slavery. In fact, just give me 1 second. Let me pull it up here, my reference, and I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, here we go. Yes. I'm going to just share my screen here real quick. But there were slaves which were beaten. That is true. And Prophet Muhammad actually talked about it. And yeah, here we go. And it says over here, when I was beating my servant, I heard a voice behind me saying, Abu Mas'ud, bear in mind, Allah has more dominance over you than you have upon him. I turned and found him to be the messenger of Allah. I said, Allah's messenger. Oh, I'm sorry. I said, Allah's messenger. I set him free for the sake of Allah. Thereupon, he said, had you not done that, the gates of hell would have opened for you, or the fire would have burnt you. So to beat a slave is condemned in Islam. Not only that,
hadith from Bukhari about beating slaves, and it had to do with women. You should never expect to beat your wife like you would beat a slave and then have sex with her that night.
Right, but that doesn't mean you can go ahead and start beating up these people. I think that's an interpretation some people are creating.
It just says, don't expect to beat your wife like a slave and then expect to have sex with her that night. It just seems to involve that.
Well, I think people are taking, that is something open for interpretation, which people are spinning off their own interpretation. But the hadith is clear over here. You cannot beat a slave. But not only that, but the version of slavery inside Islam, it says that you have to wear the same clothes. I'm sorry, the slave has to wear the same clothes as a slave master. So if he wears a tuxedo, he's got to wear a tuxedo. If he eats the same food, if he has a steak and lobster for dinner, well, guess what food your slave is going to eat? Lobster and steak.
Who was a slave of Islam in the world today, and he did not get offered steaks. Instead, he was beaten with sticks and made to sleep in the barn.
And I condemn that. And that evil should be fought and defeated. But going back to the life of Muhammad, you said Muhammad owned slaves, and that's true. But when we look at what this version of slavery is, it is actually pretty nice. They got to eat the same food, wear the same clothes as a slave master. No beating. And by the way, the Quran makes many good expiations, meaning if you see good in your slave, set him free. So if you look at slavery in Islam, it's so good. Please, God, make me the first slave if they follow the Islamic system.
So the Muslims ran the slave trade in Africa for centuries, and somehow or other the slaves were not treated that well by them. So we have an interesting world you live in which the pure slave of Islam is like getting a job at a stockbroker or something, whereas the slaves that are beaten that's not real Islam. So the fact is, Muslims have two choices to do it. Not one is to do it your way or do it their own way, but either way they're doing it.
So this goes back to what the scriptures teach. I always like to take things back to the Sunnah of Muhammad and the teachings of the Quran. Let's look and see what that says. And do we see any justification for that? So now what happened, let me go back and explain what happened, what you're describing. So now we see that people's understandings evolve, and now money, profit, and other things creep up in their mind. So they're no longer really thinking, the Hadith and Quran says this. Hey, I can make a big buck, or I can make a lot of money by taking these slaves and doing these terrible things to them. This is in Islamic Sharia law. This is called an Israeliyat. This is a Judeo-Christian influence upon the Muslims. So they're not imitating Muhammad, they're imitating the people of the book.
So you've made war peaceful, and now then you've made slavery a thing to be envied.
If you look in the Quran, what I would say, it's the slavery. Well, let me put this challenge out to you. You're a man who studied the Hadith, you studied the Quran, and maybe more than myself, and you studied the Sirah. Can you show me anything like a beating or something negative or bad which Muhammad authorized or did something to a slave?
The one that immediately comes to my mind is not a slave, but a poet in which he had them assassinated. Now let's see if I can. I do remember at the Battle of Badr, before the Battle of Badr, that his scouts got some slaves from the Meccans and they began to beat them. And Muhammad was praying as he beat them. And what he stood up and says was, when you beat them, they tell you the lie. And when you don't beat them, they tell you a truth. But I can't help but notice the slaves are being beaten and Muhammad is praying.
Okay, but that's why Muhammad did clarify his official position in the Hadith, which I'm showing you, that if you beat a slave, then the gates of hell will open up for you. So this is
up here. I see we have some slaves whom your right hand possesses. What is
Yes.
that reference to? Scroll down.
Oh yeah, you want to scroll up there? Yeah, there you go. It's just more on slavery. Yes, correct.
Okay.
And this is about rape. I think you mentioned some things about that the slave women, they were, I'm sorry, women can be used as sex slaves or something like that. So I just wanted to get that reference
I
for you.
recall,
Yes.
women can be used. Slaves can be, a master can have sex, while he's treating his slaves well, which you're talking about, how extraordinarily well they were treated, steak and lobster, fine clothes, tuxedos. Someone other than women being raped or having forced sex with doesn't sound like as a lobster and dinner meal and a tuxedo.
Okay, so let's do that one. Let's do what Islam really teaches about this. And I think we got 9 minutes, so I want to make sure we end on time.
Man, keep time.
Yeah. Okay, so here's what I want to do. Let's take a step away from the Quran and the Hadith, teachings of Muhammad, and let's just talk about this institution about women, right-hand captives of war. Let's look at how that would apply in today's time. Now, if we look inside the world today, we've got San Diego, average home there's $500,000. And then we got Venezuela, where there is almost a situation of famine, which is slowly brewing over there. It's going to get to a point where it's going to be so bad that they're going to see their children starve, and it's actually getting to that point. What will the women do in this critical situation? Will they watch their kids starve and die? Or if the option was made available that, hey, you know what, you could go and those people living in San Diego with those $500,000 homes, you can offer yourself, live as a, quote, co-wife. That system doesn't exist today, but 1,400 years ago, that system did exist. And he will clothe you, feed you, and your kids will go to the same school, which is really big. And of course, you're going to have to do this terrible thing. Now, that's a horrible, horrible situation. But that's a lesser of the two evils. So even in today's time, slaves which are right-hand possessor, or what you guys have called sex slavery, which actually is not the right word, that is even viable for today. It's a horrible situation. It's how the world is bad. So Islam came to address this, which already pre-existed, and lay down some rules. If you're going to do this, if a situation happens like this, here's how you handle the situation. And that's why in my debate with Robert Spencer, and I think he's a friend of yours, right? Robert Spencer?
I've met him personally once.
Yes. I challenged him in that debate. Show me in the Quran, Sirah, Hadith, or all of the Islamic scriptures, one woman being raped, and you will never find it. That is because...
So then Quran 4:24, also forbidden to you are married women unless they are your slaves.
Right.
This is what you're referring to?
Yes. You will never find a rape being taken place in, or a justification, not even any rape being taken place in any of our scriptures, unless you know of one.
Well, are we talking back to Khaybar? Is not the rules for intercourse with captive women laid out in which you're not to have you're not to have sex with them if they're pregnant, having their period, but if they're married, that's okay.
Well, at this time, if you recall, in the Battle of Khaybar, their men were dead, and they were taken as captives. So now this is a situation we're dealing with, which is very similar to what we're finding in Venezuela. What would happen if all the women and children we're just, okay, you guys can go home. Well, they're going to face a situation of famine and starvation because it was already bad enough having a husband there and trying to find food and eat. Now that he's gone, we're talking about a very slow death. So both the men and the women voluntarily engage in this. The winner of the army are going to take the remaining women and children into their homes. Now, to put that in enormous burden on these people, unfortunately, they had to offer this. I'll give you an example, the Battle of Hunain. In the Battle of Hunain, they attacked Prophet Muhammad, but they brought their women and children and said, come on, guys, let's all go along onto the battlefield so that, God forbid, if all the men died, hey, please take care of these men, women, or these women and children. So that's why we don't find any rape in Islam or in any of the hadith or seerah. And it goes back to, remember the hadith which we talked about beating a slave? So this is another reason why there's no rape. How can you rape a woman if you can't even beat her? Can you explain that to me?
So this business of also forbidden you are married women unless they are your slaves, someone that she's going to be enjoying gay, this is not what you call rape?
Well, unfortunately, this is the less, she's not going to be raped, that's for sure, because you can't rape a woman.
Sex here. What do you mean it's not going to be? And also forbidden to you, this is about sex, you are married women unless they are your slaves.
Right.
So a slave who's married and she has a husband who's a slave also, you can have sex with her. You don't call that rape. That's what I call rape.
No, because first of all, what do we do in a situation? Let's go there. So now she's a captive of war. She's now taken out of now remember, these are women who were taken along on the battlefield. And let's say she's an unwilling participant. Let's say she doesn't want to do this. Well, obviously, if you cannot beat a woman, as we saw beat a slave, as we read in this hadith, how are you going to be able to rape her? Especially when the Quran says, it said that you are supposed to do good to the parents, kinfolk, orphans, and it goes on, and the slaves whom your right hand has possessed. So if you can't beat her, sir, how can you rape her?
We agree that the woman whose the right hand possesses was taken in some form of combat.
Correct.
Okay. So why wouldn't this same rule apply if I'm on the streets of London, I'm a Muslim, and I see an attractive blonde woman, I pull her into the alley, she's now a kafir under my control, she's been captured in combat, and so I have sex with her.
You mean just... Yeah, so you're just walking down the street, you see a beautiful girl, and you're like, hey, you know what, I'm at war.
Now my right hand now possesses her, I've overpowered her with force, and so now then I can have sex with her, whether she's married or not, according to this.
So this is where a little bit of common sense we have to read with the scripture. So when we read the sword verses in the Quran, you and I know that we as citizens in a country, we don't have the right to wage war on behalf of the Islamic government. Nobody does. And you have no right to wage war on behalf of the United States of America. So the only person who has the right to wage war is the Khalifa. Now, I think we got about 4 more minutes. Let me very quickly address your claim or your question. What about a woman who doesn't want to do this thing, and yet she's taken as a captive? I'm sure you probably heard about the story of Safiya. So I'm going to very quickly paraphrase this for you because I know we're running out of time. And can you read that, sir? Just read this first paragraph. So let me paraphrase it for you.
Yeah.
So this was the Battle of Khaybar, I think, what you were talking about. And so 2 captives were given to Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Safiya and another woman. Now here is the woman who she began to slap her face and pour dust over her head. Why? Because she's thinking, oh my God, I don't want to have sex with Prophet Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I don't want to be raped.
Prophet Muhammad has previously, I think, killed her husband.
This was a war, yes, in a battle. So let's talk about why. Okay, so now this is very interesting. This is pivotal. So now he's given, this slave girl doesn't want to do this thing. What do? Do you just rape her? Do you just beat her up? Or what do you do? Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, take this she-devil away from me. Please take her away from me. And she was spared. So now her and Safiya are walking by. And so the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, what's that mark on your face? And then she said, well, that's because my husband punched me in the eye. Again, I'm paraphrasing here, and you can read the whole story over here. And she said, you know what? I saw you in a dream of the sun, of the moon that would fall into my lap. and that moon was Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is kind of a romantic story, but the important point here is, here was a woman who didn't want to do this thing, and we see she was not raped. So when we look inside the scripture, if the Quran says you can't beat a slave, so if you can't beat him, you can't rape him unless you know of a way to do it, because I don't know, and I don't want to know actually. But not only that, but we see there are no rapes that have ever taken place in any of the Hadith, Sirah, Quran, nothing like that. And when we see that a woman who doesn't want to do this thing, just get her away from him, take her out.
I remember when Muhammad, and under the rules of how to not rape women, the custom, the Muslim way, he talks about, they talk about, we were coitus interruptus. He said, you do that? He didn't say don't be fucking the women. Instead, what he says is you actually pull out before you ejaculate. Why would you do that? A child will be born whether as Allah wants it or not.
Well, what I know is that if there's a girl, let's say there's a slave captive war, you better not beat her, because the gates of hell is going to open up for you, and you should follow the example of Prophet Muhammad. Oh, by the way, that was just so the Safiya story. I'm sure you've probably heard of Rayhana. I'm not talking about the slave. I'm sorry, the singer.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, same thing. It says over here that Rayhana, and for those of you who are watching this, you can just hit pause on the YouTube video and you can read this. Now, Rayhana was the same situation. She wanted to cling to her religion, and she didn't like Islam. So it said over there, so the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam stayed away from her. Let's see if I can read it. He says, never leave me. She showed repugnance towards Islam when she was captured and clung to Judaism. So the apostle of put her aside and felt some displeasure. So the one who, this is another reference for you, the one who doesn't want to do this thing, put her aside, tell her, get this girl away from me. That's what Islam teaches. That's why I say Islam condemns raping captives of war. And that's our time, unless you have more time.
No, I do not.
Okay. Let me stop sharing. Yeah.
All right. I must say you're an interesting man. You're able to take war and turn it into peace. You're able to take slavery and turn it into a good job. And you're able to take rape and turn it into a nice day in heaven. Have a nice day, sir.
Okay. Thank you, sir. You too.
Bye-bye.